Good evening and welcome to this week's Behind Headlines. And in this programme tonight we shall be discussing President Trump's historic visit to the Middle East, where he met with leaders from Saudi Arabia, Qatar and also the United Arab Emirates, and controversially met the new leader of Syria, al-Shams. But what was most disturbing was the fact that Donald Trump did not meet Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem, nor did Israel's Prime Minister know about it. So we'll be asking, has President Trump betrayed Israel? It's great to do another program with you again, Reagan, particularly on this historic week in terms of US foreign policy. And that was last week, Donald Trump's first visit in his second term to the Middle East. Share with us your thoughts on him meeting with the leaders of the Saudis, the Qataris, those from the United Arab Emirates, and of course the controversial 30-minute meeting he had with HDS or al-Shams, the new president of the Syrian regime.
Yeah, it's important, Simon, that we consider the significance of this. We're going to be getting into the analytics of it all and the specifics of it all. But honestly, when I first heard this was going on, I thought, well, this is exactly what I've been looking for, what I've been thinking would happen, that Trump cannot fully be trusted in relation to Israel. It certainly cannot be seen as prioritizing Israel. And it's interesting because just a personal anecdote, because you and I live in the real world, we live in real life. We don't just sit here and talk about what's going on. We have these conversations on a daily basis. I go into my local coffee shop, I order my coffee on a Sunday morning as all of this is brewing the previous week. And my friend there asked me what I think about it. And he says, what's your thought on what's going on over in the Middle East at the moment in relation to Trump's visit? And I said, well, honestly, I don't think that this is a good move. I don't think that it's wise for Trump to even be seen to be sidelining Israel. Whatever his politics behind it, this is at the very least, at the very best, bad optics. And this is how I think any discerning viewer is going to look at it and say, yeah, regardless of diplomatic rationale and reasons, this is bad optics. It's created a fiasco and has left a lot of questions as to whether or not, as we are asking, has President Trump betrayed Israel?
It also gives us an indication of where President Trump's foreign policy is going.
Absolutely.
His direction as well, which is very important, particularly for those who pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Let's just run through some of the key events that occurred last week on President Trump's historic visit to the Middle East. So last week he had high-profile meetings with the leaders of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates. He also met the new leader of Syria, al-Shams, and in Riyadh, he announced that he was dropping sanctions against the Islamist regime and invited Syria to join the Abraham Accords despite the obvious security threats to Israel and ethnic minorities in Syria. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was not informed about his high-profile visit to the region and was disappointed that on this occasion the US President didn't visit him in Jerusalem to show solidarity with Israel. We also see that it was not only the Israeli Prime Minister who was concerned about President Trump's vision of reshaping the new Middle East, but also his former Vice President Mike Pence. An interview with Meet the Press was very, very condemning of President Trump's visit to the Middle East. And we'd be asking, has President Trump betrayed America's greatest ally in the Middle East, that is Israel? Now, we're going to start off with a very important scripture. And this scripture today comes from Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 16, that says, "You will come up against my people Israel like a cloud to cover the land, that it will be in latter days that I will bring you against my land, so that the nations may know me when I am hallowed in you, O Gog, before their eyes."
Yeah, it's important that we recognize that God is the God of history and that He is working and moving in all of these situations to accomplish His perfect plan and purpose. We recognize and we understand that there will be an en masse coming against Israel. And personally, I know that people might disagree with that. I don't see how the USA is excluded from that contingent of nations standing against Israel. I think that all of the nations will come against Israel, including the United States, which up to this point has maintained pretty good relationship with Israel. Not that it's not had its issues and its foibles over the years, and certainly U.S. Diplomatic meddling has sometimes created some potentially disastrous scenarios, but we're generally thankful that there's been a good relationship. When you and I were in Jerusalem shortly after the 7th of October, and we were among another group, there were others there, some visiting from the States, a lot of positivity about the potential for this Trump tenure, right? Okay, obviously he wasn't president at that time, but there was still a lot of people and conversations pretty upbeat about the prospect of Trump returning and another very blatantly pro-Israel president in office. And I just expressed some muted concerns and lack of being convinced over it. And truly, I think this is at the beginning of what we're going to see. I don't think that this is the same President Trump who moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem.
Well, it's a different administration, isn't it? I mean, all the neoconservatives are being forced out. The likes of Mike Pence are no longer there, who had a massive influence over Trump and foreign policy. There's no Mike Pompeo either. The only strong evangelical in the administration, and the rest of them are Catholics, and they're US isolationists, America first, and don't really care about fighting good and evil. This is all about America's economic interest and boosting American power on the world stage. Yeah. And that's what we're seeing. But thankfully, there was Mike Pompeo, America's new ambassador to Israel, in place. Mike Huckabee, sorry. So we pray that he would have a great influence. But let's have a look now and see these developments that took place, historic developments that took place last week. So on the 10th of May, the Times of Israel reported under the following headline: Trump aims for historic return to the region, taking Saudi Arabia, Qatar and the UAE, but not Israel. It goes on to say that US President Donald Trump heads to Saudi Arabia, Qatar and the United Arab Emirates on Monday, eyeing big business deals. Even accords on the Middle East hotspots will be harder to seal. While Israel's war against Gaza, groups and Iran's nuclear weapons program loom large over Trump's first major foreign visit on his second term, the White House said he looks forward to a historic return to the region. 8 years ago, Trump was chose Saudi Arabia for his first overseas trip as president, when he memorably posed over a glowing orb with the leaders of Egypt and Saudi Arabia. And US President Donald Trump heads for Saudi Arabia, Qatar, United Arab Emirates on Monday, eyeing big business deals, even as the accords on the Middle East hotspots will be harder to seal.
Well, I think that pretty much sums it up. It's about business deals, and this is where we've seen Trump previously, but I think even more so now, Simon. He is bringing his own business concerns and business deals into his presidential role. And we've even seen just in the past week, there's this amazing, massive gift of over $300 million value jet. It's like a flying palace, incredible scenes, insane, amazing when you look at the interior of that thing. But then you can look at how he's also procured on that a massive deal worth about $4 billion to have a golf course as well there. So you're kind of looking at all of these different ins and outs, and he's mixing his political office with his personal business interests. Personally, maybe this is, it is obviously allowed in some way. There's nothing deterring that. So I'm not going to take away from, the right that he has. Is it professional? I don't really think so. I don't think it's presidential.
I mean, what was interesting as well, that previously back in 2017 on his first trip as his first term as US president, he deliberately visited Saudi Arabia because he wanted to anchor US foreign policy with Saudi Arabia and Israel. And of course, then that led to the establishment of the Abraham Accords a few years later. But there's none of this here. He's gone straight, for example, to Saudi Arabia He's gone to the United Arab Emirates, who obviously have very close ties with the United States. They have close ties with Israel. They are pushing this move towards globalization and one world religion, that the UAE is at the center of that, plus their technology as well, huge amounts of money. But controversially, he's also visited the Qataris as well. Yeah. So by visiting the Gulf states and prioritizing them over Egypt, he's bypassing the more traditional Arab allies in the Middle East, including Israel, in favor of the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia. So this is definitely a dramatic turn that President Trump is actually taking. So there's one quote here, and this is said by, it's hard for me to escape the idea that President Trump is going to the Gulf because this is his happy place. And this is from John Alterman, who's the director of the Middle East program of the Center for Strategic and International Studies. So we see really that he's gearing up US foreign policy to backing economic and financial interests in backing up the Gulf states.
Yeah, Riyadh, Doha, and Abu Dhabi are expected to pull out all the stops, and they did do this, as we'll see in a minute, for welcoming Trump, who's making his first major overseas trip after briefly attending, of course, the funeral of Pope Francis in Rome the other week. And his visit began on May 13th in Riyadh to much fanfare, much celebration. He always is very warmly welcomed. Trump is very, very popular in the Arab states with many individuals, and that there's part of that is the financial element. Also, part of it is he does speak hardball, right? He does talk in a way that he gets the Middle East. Okay, this is undeniable. He gets the bartering system. He gets how to deal with the individuals who are heads of state. He understands the mentality very, very well. He brings his business dealings into it. And let's face it, over the years, it's undeniable that money talks, particularly in that region and in that context. And what Trump has done is he has spoken in such a way and acted in such a way that has curried favor with each of these parties concerned.
Absolutely. So let's have a look at this excellent CBN news report that announces President Trump's historic visit to the Middle East without informing Israel, and how Israel's concerned that this may lead to a Palestinian state.
Just hours after walking free from the captivity of a Hamas dungeon in Gaza, Idan Alexander enjoyed this emotional reunion with his family. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu gave credit for Alexander's release to President Trump and the IDF.
This was achieved thanks to our military pressure and the political pressure exerted by President Trump. This is a winning combination.
In his first message, Alexander thanked President Trump and wrote out, "Am Israel High, the people of Israel live." Alexander later spoke on the phone with the president.
And he's coming home to his parents, which is really great news. I mean, to me, it's big news. They thought he was dead, so that's sad.
Netanyahu also said he spoke to President Trump after what many are concerned is a growing disagreement between the two countries.
He told me, I am committed to Israel. I am committed to continuing to work with you in close cooperation to achieve all of our war goals, to release all the hostages, and to defeat Hamas. It goes together. The things are intertwined.
Still, some Middle East analysts see Alexander's release as a diplomatic victory for Hamas. While the terror group received no compensation, they say it succeeded in drawing the U.S. into pressuring Israel to end the war in Gaza. Netanyahu's office announced it's sending a negotiating team to Doha to see if a deal can be reached to release more hostages from Gaza. All this on the eve of a major push by the IDF to defeat Hamas, and as President Trump begins his visit to the region. President Trump arrived Tuesday in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and greeted by Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. The goal of the trip is a potential diplomatic and economic bonanza that could bring as much as $1 trillion in investment in the U.S. Regional leaders will participate in a summit Wednesday that may include Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. Some believe Crown Prince bin Salman may want to tie the establishment of a Palestinian state to normalizing relations with Israel. It's this focus on a Palestinian state, along with the lure of a massive economic deal, that concerns many Christian groups who support Israel. It's why the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem is putting out a call to prayer that says, in part, we are calling on committed Christians everywhere to set themselves aside for more focused prayer over the coming days concerning the high-stakes diplomacy playing out before our eyes. This moment could bring great benefits for Israel and the entire region, or it could bring us closer to the dire prophetic judgment of Joel chapter 3. That passage scripture issues a warning about the consequences of dividing up the land of Israel.
Well, always very thankful for our friends at CBN and their efficiency in reporting. They have a great contingent of people there located in Jerusalem to be able to access some really great inside information, essentially. But what we have here in the Daily Telegraph, unpacking a little bit more of this trip, Simon, is reporting on the 13th of May, under the headline, Trump may just have found the secret to peace in the Middle East. Interesting. This may just have found the secret to peace in the Middle East. We'll see. But he says Saudi Arabia is proving to be a financially and diplomatically indispensable ally to America. Since President Franklin D. Roosevelt declared that the defense of Saudi Arabia is vital to the defense of the United States in February of 1943, going back a bit, relations between Washington and Riyadh have been framed in transactional terms. Saudi Arabia, of course, has supplied the U.S. with oil necessary to keep the economy afloat, and the U.S. has offered the Gulf Kingdom security against foreign adversaries. With the U.S.'s transition to energy dependence and the inexorable phasing out of fossil fuels, the long-term sustainability of U.S.-Saudi cooperation was being called into question. President Joe Biden's arm's-length approach to Mohammed bin Salman over Jamal Khashoggi's 2018 murder and Saudi Arabia's courtship of closer ties with China and Russia reinforced these doubts. Trump's visit to Riyadh, though, clearly demonstrates that rumors of the demise of U.S.-Saudi cooperation are greatly exaggerated, the agenda on Trump's visit to the kingdom differing markedly from his foreign policy debut in 2017. While Trump left Riyadh 8 years ago, hailing a $350 billion 10-year arms deal, he hopes to exit Saudi Arabia this time with strategically vital investments in the American economy and more robust diplomatic partnership. I mean, we're past the visit now. This was the Telegraph reporting prior. Would you say that that was achieved, Simon?
I think so. I mean,
Yeah.
but if you see where, for example, Saudi Arabia has come from, it was interesting how, for example, that FDR, for example, decided to form an alliance with Saudi Arabia in the heat of battle during the Second World War, because the Americans realized they needed Saudi oil. And so what the Saudis have done really since the 1950s is use the American petrodollar, the money that they earn from selling oil to the Americans and to the West, to use that to pump their jihadi form of Islam, which is called Wahhabism. Until only recently, that ideology was the main political and spiritual ideology of the House of Saud. But now that's changed because they realize that this is what is going to bring down the House of Saud, that they've essentially created a kind of giant within that's uncontrollable. So we see that bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, has massively reformed Saudi Arabia. He's weaned Saudi Arabia off its dependency on Wahhabism and really has modernized Saudi Arabia, including their interpretation of Islam, which is pretty tremendous. But we also saw a difficult relationship with the Saudis and the Democrats. But now Trump is back. He's seeing that there's a possibility to do business. There's a huge financial investment of the Saudis to invest in AI and American technology. And so this is why he's then considering that this is essentially, in his eyes, a good deal. So let's have a look now at this very slick presentation produced by the White House on President Trump's visit to Saudi Arabia last week.
We believe in peace through strength. You have to have the strength. I believe it is God's job to sit in judgment, my job to defend America, and to promote the fundamental interest of stability, prosperity, and peace. We had 52 days of thunder and lightning on the Houthis in Yemen like they've never seen before. This was a swift, ferocious, decisive, and extremely successful use of military force. So we hit them hard, we got what we came for, and then we got out. The gleaming marvels of Riyadh and Abu Dhabi were not created by the so-called nation builders, neocons, or liberal nonprofits. The birth of a modern Middle East has been brought by the people of the region themselves. Peace, prosperity, and progress ultimately came not from a radical rejection of your heritage, but rather from embracing your national traditions and embracing that same heritage that you love so dearly.
Well, as always, an amazing videography and some excellent imagery of that trip. And yeah, it's important to recognize the transformation of relationship between the U.S. and Saudi, of course, over the years, and how that's improved in recent years. Also, that's had a massive impact on the whole of the Middle East, specifically in relation to Israel. You know, I know people who previously, 10 years ago, would never have fathomed traveling to Saudi Arabia, would never have fathomed being able to visit the many biblical sites, by the way, that are in Saudi Arabia, who now have, with Israeli passports, gone to visit Saudi Arabia.
We have also to understand, without the Saudi support for the Abraham Accords, there's no way the United Arab Emirates or Bahrain would have signed the Abraham Accords. So there was speculation before October the 7th that the Saudis were going to sign a normalization agreement with Israel, until that all blew up and put that whole recognition of Israel normalizations completely off the agenda. Of course, now it's a completely different Middle East after October the 7th, but it does show you how far the Saudis are moving. But the question is, are they going to be influenced by the Qataris? Are they going to be influenced by the Iranians into pushing Israel into creating a Palestinian state, which we know of the dangers and the spiritual dangers, not only for Israel, but for the world, if that happens. Now, but also more controversially, we saw that President Trump visited Qatar. And by visiting Qatar was very, very disturbing, knowing that Qatar as a nation is the spiritual center for the Muslim Brotherhood. They have a safe haven there for the leaders of Hamas, who are literally worth billions. They also are home to Al Jazeera, which is propagating Islamic fundamentalist ideology through that network. And we also see that, for example, Doha is using its finances and its riches to Islamize the West as well. So it's very controversial that President Trump decided to visit the Qataris.
Well, what I find equally and perhaps even more controversial than that is that on top of all that you just mentioned, I do find it obscene, the attempt to bring Eden Alexander, the released Israeli hostage, an American Israeli citizen, to Qatar following his release to meet with the president. I thought that was just bizarre. Qatar has been a massive influencer in this whole cause of we could talk about Palestine, right? We could talk about the Palestinian movements that exist, and there are many different movements within that disputed territory. But Qatar has bankrolled the disruption across the United States on university campuses. It's bankrolled disruption in our own nation, supplying funds to these particular organizations that have created mass havoc and its misguided attempts at advocacy. And so when you have President Trump seeing and securing, and we're so thankful for that, you know, we praise and give gratitude to the one who sets the captives free, for enabling Eden Alexander to return. The one who sets the captives free is not Trump, it is the Lord God Almighty. But Trump being the means, arguably, of that, saying, okay, let's bring Eden Alexander over to Qatar with everything, on top of everything that you just outlined. Again, this is not going to sit well in Israel, and is going to create and has created, as an abundance of Jewish headlines and Israeli voices have indicated, some consternation. Absolutely.
So let's unpack a bit more information on Donald Trump's historic visit to Doha in Qatar. So the Daily Telegraph have this title: Trump signs armed drones deals with Qatar. So it says that Donald Trump signed a deal with Qatar to sell long-range armed drones as he landed in Doha. On the second leg of his Gulf talks, the US president approved the sale of 8 MQ-9B Reapers, remotely piloted aerial vehicles used extensively by Americans in the Middle East. And I've seen these. These are very scary Predator drones. The $2 billion US dollar deal also includes hundreds of bombs, missiles, radars and air defense systems, as well as US technical support. Qatar, which hosts America's largest base in the region, is the second largest purchaser of US military equipment after Saudi Arabia. They said that Doha had tried but failed to have its purchases of Reaper drones approved during the Biden administration. Mr. Trump, who hailed this as a very special friendship with the Qatari Emirate, also signed what he called the largest order of jets in the history of Boeing, saying that the deal was worth $200 billion and included 160 jets. The White House later announced that the US-Qatari agreements focused on defense, energy and tech would generate $1.2 trillion in economic exchange.
Well, it comes just as the U.S. president faces mounting criticism over the new jumbo jet that we were talking about earlier from Qatar, representing the most expensive gift ever given to the U.S. government, which has raised a host of legal, ethical, and security concerns, with the aircraft worth about $400 million, that's 300 million pounds, being available to the president throughout his second term before being transferred to the Trump Presidential Library Foundation in 2029. It is understood. After signing these documents, we're going to another level of relationship between Qatar and the United States. The Emir of Qatar, Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, said at the signing ceremony in Doha, "This has been a very interesting couple of hours," Mr. Trump responded, adding that the pair discussed the war in Ukraine and the, quote, interesting situation, end quote, in Iran. That's a good way of putting it, the interesting situation in Iran.
But I mean, it's a failure also to recognise that Qataris, however much they may present a nice face to President Trump, they're essentially an enemy of Israel, and they're essentially an enemy of the United States. It's their desire to see the United States, Britain, and the entire Middle East be converted into kind of Islamic extremism, and they're using their wealth and their power to do it. We also see, for example, here that Con Coughlin, who is the security editor of the Daily Telegraph, he also writes for the Gatestone Institute, wrote an article under the following heading: Trump must reject Qatar's dubious flying palace offer. He says Mr. Trump revealed the essential philosophy behind his tough foreign policy decisions. He hates war and loves gold. That's it. To hear it fully, to get nearer to its meaning and debate its sufficiency, you have to step over to so much broken glass. He goes on to say, for example, that if Trump is really serious about achieving his goal of bringing peace to Gaza, then our first course of action must be to persuade the Qataris to end their funding of Hamas, which has allowed it to maintain its murderous war against Israel. Trump should also once again demand that Qatar's client Hamas release all the remaining hostages by the end of the week. He says that if US President Trump is serious about bringing peace to the Middle East, then he should rethink again about accepting the gift of a luxury $400 million aircraft from the rulers of Qatar. The country is renowned for its continuing support for Islamist terror groups, for continuing to fan the flames that would reignite the fundamentalist Arab Spring, for its anti-US terrorist activity, and it's for attacks on the US. He goes on to say, far from being an ally of the US, the Qataris have, in recent years, done their level best to undermine American efforts to bring peace and stability to the Middle East, not to mention radicalizing US higher education. The Middle East Forum, Benjamin Barad, has detailed how since 2012, Qatari's $40 billion spending spree has brought influence and control over elite institutions.
While other Arab states such as the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain have been prepared to demonstrate their pro-Western sympathies and plans to stabilize the region by joining the Abraham Accords signed in the dying days of Trump's first term and aimed at normalizing relations with Israel, the Qataris have instead opted to take a different path, one where they have actively encouraged and supported America's enemies.
Which is complete naivety on behalf of Trump and his foreign policy to realise and not seeing the danger of the Qataris. And this is also why Israel is so concerned. So to take Israel out of the equation and to deal directly with the Qataris, who are the sponsors of Hamas and were responsible for the actions of Hamas on October the 7th, is not going to bring about peace and stability in the Middle East.
And adding Syria into this equation, because Trump is wanting to potentially add Syria into the Abraham Accords. Okay, fine, great, wonderful. If we're talking about a different universe, because there's been no indicator of a desire for peace between HTS and, remember, Israel in the days immediately following the fall of Bashar al-Assad, they had to carry out operations to destroy as much functional equipment of the Syrian military that had been left behind as possible in order to keep it out of the hands of this terror group. It's inarguable to call them a terror group, but Trump, and there's going to be viewers, I know there's some for whom Trump can do no wrong, okay? We are not, on this program, we have never suffered from any sort of Trump can do no right. We've been pretty good at saying what's good and what's bad. But in this particular case, I think it's so misguided, Simon.
We have to also acknowledge that Trump is a million times better than the Democrats and Joe Biden. He's doing so much to restore Christian freedoms to the states. He's pulled America out of that globalist institutions and is restoring sovereignty to the United States. And we have to acknowledge that. We acknowledge the great role in his first term, where he was Israel's greatest friend in the White House, and we acknowledge all those
There was a lot to be commended.
And so we do need this kind of balance going forward, that this is not the President Trump or an administration that we expected him to be, but not surprising when you look and see who the key individuals are in his new administration and their policy to project US power, to enrich the United States, essentially going after gold, and not very much concerned about the moral dilemmas of all this, knowing the kind of evil that is behind the Qataris, because otherwise, why would you support Hamas? Why would you support the murder of over 1,200 Israelis and foreign nationals in a horrific way? And to understand as well that the enemies of Israel are also America's enemies as well, and that you can't negotiate with these people. And it's like making a pact with the devil. And that's the danger, I think, of what Trump is doing.
You can negotiate with them as Trump has done if you exclude Israel and demonize in some way eventually. Because we have to remember, HTS, following its taking of Damascus, we saw the video footage, right? We're taking, it's next to Al-Quds, right? We're going to Jerusalem next. We're going down and we're going to take Israel now, right? And yes, some of this is grandstanding. It's, it's just a lot of talk to some degree. But Israel was forced to protect the Druze population, which has long faced extreme ostracization and difficulty, forced to protect the Syrian Christian population there, particularly in the southern region of Syria, because of what is a terror group. Trump, though, finds al-Jilani attractive as an individual, and all he has to say about his terrorist past is he has a strong past.
Which is extremely concerning. And to link it all, the Muslim Brotherhood also are in power in Turkey with President Erdogan, and President Erdogan wants a military base in Syria in which to attack Israel. He's already called for Islamic nations to unite to form one Islamic army to destroy Israel and wipe Israel off the earth. And the Muslim Brotherhood are having huge influence in Syria. with al-Sams, the new president of the Syrian regime, together in Qatar and also with Hamas as well. So let's have a look at another of President Trump's slick videos, and this time is when he visited Doha to meet the Qataris.
It's a true privilege to visit your country, special country, and gather as friends. I'm honored to be the first American president ever to officially visit. To the Emir, to the royal family, and to this entire nation, congratulations on a spectacular job. As president, I'm proud that our growing friendship is blossoming into a full-fledged economic and security partnership. We're setting records on this trip. We're bringing a lot of investment back into the United States of America. Will be well over $10 trillion. I want to thank Your Highness for helping with that number. You know you can count on us, and you know that it's going to be a great investment for you. So tonight, let us give thanks for the blessings of this friendship. We have a great friendship. I want to wish peace to the Emir and to all Qataris. Working together, we can help the entire region unlock its potential. So I just want to say it's an honor to be with you.
Well, again, with thanks to the White House there for permission to use that footage. Now, you and I have talked over the past few weeks and been considering this. We think, and there's an article in The Atlantic which definitely seems to indicate that one of the significant dangers, not just going on in relation to the Middle East, we could also, on quite a separate front, talk about Ukraine and Russia as well, is Steve Witkoff, the president's friend and golf partner, who is essentially the acting Secretary of State.
Yeah, which is really interesting because he's been the main envoy of President Trump since before he took power on his in his presidential inauguration. He was already working behind the scenes with the Biden administration to bring back some of the hostages, and he was appointed by President Trump himself. The fact is that he's effectively the Secretary of State in all but name. Shows you how much power and influence he has, and he is essentially the architect behind these meetings with the Qataris, with the Saudis, with the United Arab Emirates, and reaching out to Syria. And also he's then negotiating as well on behalf of President Trump on Iran to have a deal with Iran over its nuclear weapons deal, which would endanger Israel. So it's interesting to know something more about Steve Witkoff, who is effectively Donald Trump's special envoy, but more importantly, he's considered the actual US Secretary of State in de facto.
He's born in the Bronx and raised on Long Island. He's the descendant of Eastern European Jews, and his father made women's coats, taking over from Witkoff's grandfather after his grandfather suffered a heart attack. His mother taught third grade as well in school. And growing up, he learned Krav Maga, a martial art which is used, as many may know, in Israeli military training. Witkoff earned a bachelor's degree in political science and a law degree, both from Hofstra University on Long Island. He first met Trump in the 1980s when he was an associate at the New York firm Dreyer and Traub, which represented the mogul in real estate transactions. Witkoff was at a delicatessen on East 39th Street between Park and Lexington Avenues late at night when Trump arrived without any money, and recognizing Witkoff from the firm, asked if he could spot him for a ham and cheese sandwich. I wanted to be him, Witkoff recalled in the March interview with Tucker Carlson.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? And the actual article from The Atlantic starts with this, that Steve Witkoff emptied his backpack on the conference table in his second floor office in the West Wing. He wanted to show me a pager given by the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and senior officials of the Mossad. The pager commemorates the incredible operation in which Israel detonated handheld devices used by Hezbollah, the Iranian-sponsored Lebanese militant group, killing or maiming thousands of its operatives. Witkoff located the gadget amid a tangle of electronics he used to communicate abroad his role as America's shadow Secretary of State. The back of the pager, he proudly told me, carries an inscription: "Dear Steve, friend of the State of Israel, and then the acronym, OTJ, one tough Jew.
Yeah, it's quite a neat gift in one way. And one definition of Jewish toughness, of course, is the willingness to stand up to Netanyahu, who's a frustrated American president going back to the days of Bill Clinton. And then Witkoff, President Donald Trump's special envoy for more or less everything, deserved the label, but he had just pressured the Israelis to accede to a January ceasefire and hostage agreement negotiated with the help of Egypt and Qatar. Just this week, working behind Netanyahu's back, he claimed another victory, pressuring Hamas through an intermediary to release Eden Alexander, the last living American hostage in Gaza, which should have happened a very long time ago. America should have intervened, not just on his part, but on behalf of all of the hostages, not just the American, but specifically the American hostages, a significant time ago.
But what's becoming very clear with Steve Witkoff is that he is effectively Donald Trump's ambassador.
Yeah.
He's his closest ally. This is the role that he wanted as his chief negotiator or special envoy to the Middle East, to the Ukraine, to Russia. He's met with President Putin as well to try and solve the conflict in the Ukraine. So he carries that presidential influence and power with him. It's obvious that he is concerned and loves Israel, but he's more interested in bringing the hostages home than preventing another October the 7th happening again by Hamas. So he's not interested in Israel's security interests at all. He believes that he can be a leverage between the Israeli people who want the hostages home and that of the Netanyahu government. And it's very, very clear that he wants to sideline the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and has done by not informing the Israeli Prime Minister of President Trump's high-profile visit to the Middle East last week.
Well, Witkoff very definitely is described as more soft-spoken than the president, but equally predisposed to grandiose language. And he said, "We are going to have success in Syria. You're going to hear about it very quickly. We're going to have success in Libya. You're going to hear it quickly. We're going to have success in Azerbaijan and Armenia, a place that was God-forsaken almost, and you'll hear about it immediately. And ultimately, we will get to an Iranian solution and a Russian-Ukraine solution." And so, I mean, it unpacks a little bit of the learning curve that he's had, but he doesn't seem particularly bothered by some of the diplomatic failures in the Middle East. In particular, he's a transactionalist. He sees Ayatollah Khamenei and Vladimir Putin, among others, not as Machiavellian authoritarians captured by deeply felt and deeply antagonistic ideologies, but as clever negotiators. So they're approaching this, Simon, from that level. This is purely transactional. It's about being shrewd negotiators. They are approaching this devoid of an acceptance of innate depravity in these individuals.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's a power play as well.
Yeah.
It's projecting and using American power to get the deal that you want. So effectively, he's just like President Trump. This is all about the art of the deal. Everyone can negotiate on something. We just have to negotiate with the Iranians, or we have to negotiate with the Russians, and effectively not dealing with totalitarian evil regimes such as Russia and the Islamic Republic of Iran. We can work an agreement through this based on mutual interests. Knowing, for example, that in the Kremlin under President Putin that they want the destruction of the United States as the world superpower, and also that of the Iranian regime, which is what they have in common, and not understanding the evil ideology and the principalities and powers of darkness that are actually caught up in these regimes as well, is incredibly naive on behalf of Witkoff. And this is a very, very dangerous game that he's playing in, thinking he can get a deal with these totalitarian regimes when all they want is power and destruction.
And he has approached these deal-making procedures with a degree of naivety as well. Who can forget, even he himself had to acknowledge that he was duped by the Hamas leaders who were negotiating at the time to extend the ceasefire back in the late winter. And it was very obvious to see what was going on, buying time, making all sorts of promises. I don't think he is fully aware of Islamic ideology enough to know the process of deception in the context of war is a standard, and it's rooted in this idea, al-taqiyya, of deception to get good deals, to save face, to make peace in the context of warfare, to continue attaining whatever objective Islam has. So this is the ideology that is at the root of all of this. And Witkoff has approached this, just with, oh, well, this is what they told me. This is, it's so naive.
Oh, no, and of course he spoke very, very favourably of the Qataris, and I think this is the main reason why President Trump visited Doha, was purely on the strong relationship that Steve Witkoff has with the emirs of Qatar. He goes on to say, for example, that these developments stunned the long-term experts in the Middle East. They say that Witkoff has been empowered to use tools that no administration has ever used. Aaron David Miller, former State Department Middle East analyst and negotiator, told me, we've never seen an administration separate itself from Israel like this. He goes on to say that Witkoff has no formal background in international relations, nor does he have the training or experience as a diplomat to strike deals on matters of varied and complicated as the Russian-Ukraine war, the Iranian nuclear program. He is learning heavily on intuition, his record of success in real estate negotiations, and his personal friendship with the president. In recent months, he told me that he's read many books and watched Netflix documentaries on world conflicts, including Turning Point, the Vietnam War. He came to believe, as Trump did with politics, that he can turn a lack of expertise to his advantage and succeed where other professionals have failed. Now, I could say that I want to be a high-ranking diplomat, but I'm not going to be a high-ranking diplomat by watching documentaries on Netflix.
Well, this is the reality, and but I think there's not just documentary watching going on here. I think he's living in a little bit of a fantasy land, in thinking that this is at all wise or intelligible in terms of the ideas that are coming out of Witkoff's diplomatic processes. We're seeing many key allies actually being disrupted in their feelings towards what previously they felt to be a trustworthy ally in the U.S.
No, absolutely. So we have to really this is the makeup of Steve Witkoff's ideology. So it says one of his role, which reprises some of the foreign policy duties assumed by the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, in Trump's first term, rests on several premises. The international disputes are at best resolved not by multilateral institutions, but by the world's superpowers, represented by personal emiracies of strong leaders. The business imperatives can overcome ancient hatreds, whether ethnic or religion, and the US objects are fundamentally pragmatic, not overly concerned with the rights and wrongs. So it says that Witkoff is a realist in the classic formation of the Hans Morgenthau, who acts and thinks in terms of interest defined as power. Thought he'd put it differently. I'm not an ideologue, Witkoff told. Remember, I'm the amateur diplomat. I'm asked if those words, for example, were borrowed from someone else. He says, my words, but I say it tongue and cheek. And he laughed out loud. Diplomacy is negotiation, and I've been doing that all my life. Now, there is some concerns, and The Atlantic publishes this, that in many ways, because of Witkoff's transactional dealings and his dealings in real estate in New York City, the Qataris bailed him out of a major financial property investment, which he would have lost billions, and as a direct result, believe that he's now in the pay of the Qataris, which explains the direction he's taking US foreign policy under President Trump.
Again, it's part of the issue that we've been talking about. It's the merger and mixing of personal interest and business interest, whether positive or negative, in the decision making, which I think is inherently unwise and unhelpful. And we can see a great deal of this in each of, but not only Witkoff, but in Trump's dealings. They're looking not only at, they're saying they're looking for the United States interest, but I think there's a lot of personal interest going on here.
So let's have a look at the personal evidence, and this is with evidence actually written by The Atlantic. It says the following: in 2013, he took on one of the most ambitious projects, the historic Park Lane Hotel in Central Park, South. Witkoff partnered with a Malaysian financier and other investors, including Abu Dhabi's sovereign wealth fund, to buy the property for $660 million US, with plans to demolish the hotel and erect a soaring building featuring ultra luxury apartments. But the plans unraveled. First because of the market downturn in 2015 and 16, and then because Lowe was indicated on fraud charges. This is his Malayan business partner in 2018. Witkoff wasn't accused of wrongdoing, and Jonathan, a long-term real estate lawyer, for example, in New York, told me that Witkoff was hardly the only person who was deceived by the Malaysian businessman, who was still a fugitive. He managed to extract himself, and he gives credit for that. But he also then talks about how then the Qataris stepped in and paid $620 million US, effectively taking over Witkoff's stake, which kind of saved this business deal. And ever since, he's been pretty much in the hands of the Qataris.
Well, yeah, the series has prompted criticism of Witkoff, and suggestions that he's indebted to Qatar have abounded. As you know, this is, I mean, it looks pretty obvious in that regard, but Qatar is home to the largest U.S. military base in the Middle East, but maintains relations with Iran, hosting Hamas political leadership, yet engaging extensively as well with Israel, including as mediator in talks with the militant group. So it comes across that Qatar is trying to play multiple sides here. And very much
did a very good job of it. I mean,
well,
look
exactly.
at all the controversy they had
Like
when they
Trump and
hosted the World Cup in 2022.
Yeah.
That was to introduce Qatar to the world, to put Qatar on the world stage, to show the nice, pleasant face of Qatar, but ignoring its evil support for Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood. Well, President Trump has come under attack, and this no less than his former vice president, Mike Pence, and the Sunday Mail on Sunday have this story under this title: Backstabber Mike Pence trashes Trump's Saudi triumph and slams president for not visiting Israel. Says the former vice president, Mike Pence, had some choice words of recent decisions made by his former boss. President Donald Trump, doing an appearance on Meet the Press, said on Sunday morning that he's never been a fan of American presidents criticizing America on foreign soil. He said to have the president in Saudi Arabia questioning America's global war on terror and describing it as nation building and interventionists. I thought I was a disservice to generations of Americans who wore the uniform and who took the fight to our enemy, you know, in Afghanistan and in Iraq, and particularly giving that speech in Saudi Arabia where 15 of the 19 9/11 hijackers held from, not including Osama bin Laden, I thought was unfortunate. He went on to say that missing from the list of Trump stops past week was the nation of Israel, which the administration has been closely working with, most recently to secure the release of the last American hostage in Gaza, Edan Alexander, earlier this week.
Yeah, the former vice president also expressed disapproval of Trump's acceptance of that $400 million US plane from Qatar. And he said, I think first we've got to remember who Qatar is. We've got a military base there. I have members of our immediate family that have been deployed to the region. But Qatar has a long history of playing both sides. They support Hamas, they support Al-Qaeda, Pence noted. Bringing the conversation closer to home, he added that Qatar has also actually financed pro-Hamas protests on American campuses across the U.S. So the very idea we would accept an Air Force One from Qatar, I think, is inconsistent with our security and with our intelligence needs.
And he went on to say as well that I think Qatar wants to make a gift to the United States. They ought to take that $400 million and plough it into the infrastructure of our military base. But talking about Israel, he says, I think sending the message to the Arab world that we are prepared to engage, that we are prepared to support. We want economic commerce, we want strategic and security engagement. But in that trip 8 years ago, he also made the point to fly to Israel and make it clear that if the world knows nothing else, the world knows this. that America stands with Israel. He says, for me, not only the president's decision not to travel to Israel on this trip was a missed opportunity, but I also have concerns about excluding Israel from the ceasefire with the Houthis, and also have concerns about what I hear about negotiations and discussions with Iran.
Yeah, it's interesting, Simon, when we consider what's going on. You know, it does seem very definitely that there's a great deal of dual interest, a lot of shady business. This is what it reminds me of. It reminds me of corrupt, shady business dealing, trying to play multiple parties, and it's going to ultimately end in disruption and disappointment. I do think that Witkoff believes himself to be an ally of Israel. I still think Trump views himself as an ally of Israel. Mike Huckabee, who we were talking about, has said that actually, you know, Trump continues, Netanyahu and Trump speak more. And so he views Trump and Netanyahu as still allies and even close friends. So I'm aware of the optical concerns here. I think that it would be disingenuous to think that there aren't concerns in the Israeli government over what's been going on. But at the same time, perhaps there's some intelligence as to some other intentions.
Yeah. But the danger is, I think, with this one is that previously in terms of US foreign policy, and particularly during the president's first term, was that if you wanted to make peace with America and get on with special relations with America, then you needed to have special relations with Israel, which is the whole premise of the Abraham Accords. So effectively what Trump has done is pushed this completely off the curb. He's failed to recognize that it was Israel that has changed the strategic dynamics of the Middle East after October the 7th, namely by virtually destroying Hamas and certainly destroying Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, dismantling effectively the Iranian regime's capabilities to fire rockets without being attacked themselves, and also responsible for the fall of President Assad's regime in Syria. And he's taken advantage of this, but instead of confronting evil, effectively we're seeing that the American president is empowering himself financially and his administration.
Yeah, and I do believe that we should continue to pray into this situation, recognizing God is sovereign over and through it all. We'll continue to unpack more and more of this in coming days here on Behind the Headlines.